In mission together we all join our hands. In mission together throughout many lands. With our hearts united, our voices we raise. To God our Creator in glorious praise.
Hi there. Welcome to Reflections, a program sponsored by the Paducah Cooperative Ministry, where we seek to do God's work with human hands, responding to basic human needs and conditions in McCracken County. My name is Heidi Suhrheinrich. I'm the Executive Director down at the Paducah Cooperative Ministry, one of your co-hosts today. The other co-host is my friend Scott Dossett. Hiya, Scott.
I'm doing pretty good. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Good. Well, today we're going to get straight to the point. Today we're talking about homelessness here in Western Kentucky. And sometimes we have a tendency to think certain things when we think about homelessness. We think of being in the city and seeing people on the side of the street where they need change or they're asking for different kinds of things on the side of the road. We have that picture of what homelessness is, when in reality, homelessness here can sometimes look a little bit different and sometimes be hard to see at all. So, if I can, I'll open up by introducing our guests. So if you'll start off, just give us your name
I'm Monica Bilak.
and what you do.
I work at the Paducah City Schools, and I am the program director for our Transitional Student Services.
Awesome.
And
And
Sheila Forrest. I'm the homeless shelter director for Paducah Cooperative Ministry.
great, it's great to have you here.
Yes.
So we'll just start off by asking the question, can you tell us a little bit about maybe what homelessness looks like here in Paducah and in Western Kentucky?
I'll go first, and then
You guys are
we
both
work together a
experts.
lot. You know what it looks like. We're
You start,
picturing
Monica,
the same
and-
people. Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
I work in the schools, so I see it. Schools serve 3 to 21. And so it looks like any teenager you've ever seen, and any student. It's an infant, it's a toddler, it's any child, and they look just like our children, that aren't homeless. That
Yeah.
They look like everybody else's child, is that
Absolutely.
right?
That's absolutely right.
Okay. Sheila, what would you add to that?
I'd say they could be you, me. It could be the person sitting next to you at a restaurant. It could be the lady in front of you at Walmart or the man in front of you at Walmart. There is no face of homelessness. You can't see it. People here may assume a person that's pushing a cart is homeless when 9 times out of 10 they're not. They just use the cart to get from place to place. The person you see with a backpack on may be the homeless person, even though they look like they're just coming from school. They could be the homeless person. So there is no particular face.
Well, when you see television and you see movies, you imagine somebody in a doorway, you imagine somebody sleeping on a park bench, and we don't see that so much in our area. So it makes homelessness a little bit invisible. Where are they? Where are the homeless people? That's a question we get asked quite a bit when we talk about homelessness. Well, I don't ever see homeless people. Where are they?
Sometimes they're sleeping in their cars on Walmart's parking lot. Other places that stay open 24 hours a day, they will park in one place and sit for a while, then move to another spot. A lot of them sleep in their cars. They are doubled up and tripled up and quadrupled up in homes with family members. They're in hotel rooms for a couple days at a time. They'll buy a couple days and then have to be gone for a day or two and then come up with working and get their money to stay another time. They're all over the place.
Are these people that just need to get a job and then get an apartment?
No. Most of the time they have a job.
Okay.
It's just not enough to pay. Rent and deposits and utility deposits can minimum be $1,000 to get into a place to live. If you're working a part-time job or even 2 part-time jobs, you don't have the time and the luxury to save that much money. So while they may have enough to piecemeal hotel rooms, they don't have enough to go pay rent and deposits.
Or to ever really get out of that cycle,
No.
just enough for another week, just enough
and
for another
that would
week.
keep them homeless because they can't afford to put back money to be able to move with.
I think that's important to hear too, because a lot of times we get this idea that I see this person in a restaurant, and if they were really homeless, they wouldn't be spending their money on going to a restaurant. They'd be at home buying groceries to get, but they don't have any place to put those things.
Right.
Kind of
can't cook in a hotel room for real. It's a microwave, but that's about it.
Yeah.
There's no stove, nice refrigerator. They don't have that
Pots
luxury.
and pans.
So they have to go to McDonald's or
Yeah.
out to eat once in a while because they can't afford to do anything else.
Right. How about you? What would you say? What have you seen? You work with the schools. What do you see as far as these children? You know, I'm a teacher, and so I would expect, you know, kids who come into my classroom, I would think that maybe I could see a child who's homeless, and I would want to be able to meet that person's need, but it sounds like I might not even recognize them.
You wouldn't, and it's interesting. You teach a junior high, and
Yes.
I work with a lot with the high school and the junior high students, and if anything, they will put up the facade so that you will never find out. It is humiliating and it's an embarrassment, and so it is not something that anybody wants to get out. So you wouldn't know. What happens, especially for me, is that, especially in terms of high school students, that tend to be, we call it unaccompanied youth. They're on their own. They're completely independent, trying to make their way, and are trying to also learn what it means to be an adult. Also go to school, try to get a job, and it's overwhelming, and they will have a crisis pretty quick into the process. And I'll give you an example. We had a baseball player, one of my gals, and she was on the team, and she was a really good athlete. And after the game, she didn't have anywhere to go, and she was just like, she kept it all day at school. She kept it all through the game, and then I think what happens too is they keep it. Like they don't want to think about it because it's really overwhelming to think, I don't have anywhere to go tonight, and I don't know what I'm going to do. And so it was at that point, you know, that I started getting phone calls going, okay, hey, we got a problem. And so, you know, at 8 o'clock at night, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, we have a problem. So it usually ends up being very, very much a crisis situation for the older kids. And then for the younger kids, a lot of times, typically they have been in the shelter. And that was a fabulous situation because we knew they were getting this consistency, and then we can provide this transportation. So we had a lot of really good communication, keeping kids at school, keeping all this regular, and that's really important to us, keeping as much of their life regular, as much of it consistent as we can, so that they get the best benefit from our services, which is to give them an education. Elementary school, they'll be doubled up. We typically had in the shelter, or a lot of them were doubled up, living with other families. Another issue that I've had in just this recent past was fires, house fires, and it was people who were really living on the margins. I mean, it was really, everything was very tight for them. So this overwhelmed everyone.
Right.
And what happened is everyone in the family had to go somewhere else to live. Like
So they were
a
all
mom
split
and
up.
a kid, and everybody had to scatter.
Wow.
So families who were together couldn't stay together because they just had no way to recover. And so that really has devastated a number of families for us as well.
You have to wonder what the emotional toll is on a child who has that instability, that insecurity, and then they get separated from family members, and they don't know for how long they're going to be staying with this person, and maybe that'll last a week. And so like you said, they come to school and they get into that world of normal, but then at the end of the day, you know, they have to face up to that fear again. Where am I going? Sheila, we've had some of the older kids that came through the homeless shelter. Can you talk about one or two situations that you remember, the high school students?
We've had a couple young folks that came into our shelter. They were actually a couple, and he was with his mom and siblings, but they were both still in school. They ended up in Choices, which is the alternative school for students, and she was pregnant, and they were determined to finish school, and did. They both managed to finish school, but it's really difficult for them. But one of the things that they all focus on is they don't want to miss a day of school.
Right.
Whenever we've had the young ones that would be 18, they're old enough to be in our shelter as an individual, but they're still in high school. Their focus is they want to finish school. They have realized that to get that diploma will make a major difference for them, and they work really hard to do that.
Wow.
Very hard.
Well, we kind of danced around the subject of what causes homelessness. You know, the cycle of the motel. You just have enough money to pay for 1 week at a time, and many are employed. They actually do have income, but they don't make enough. And you mentioned fires. What are some of the other situations that would cause a family or an individual to fall off the edge into homelessness?
There's relationship issues.
Okay.
Oftentimes, even when we housed men, when they would be in our shelter applying for housing, they meet a lady and then they think, well, I'll just move in with her. And I would always tell them, you need to get your own place. You don't want to depend on someone else for your place to live, because the first time she gets mad at you, she's going to put you out. And then you'll be right back here. It's the same thing with the ladies. A lot of times they would come into our shelter, even the moms with kids. They come in and they stay a while and they meet someone and they decide that this is going to work perfectly, and they jump quickly and move in with them because they think it's a better option than being in the homeless shelter.
Right.
And they find out it's not.
Sometimes looking for shortcuts, maybe.
Is that because it's a stigma, or that I don't want to live in a homeless shelter, or is it because it's inconvenient, or is it?
Well, there's a curfew, and sometimes people don't like a curfew, but I would always tell them, even in your own place, you need to give yourself a curfew.
Sure.
You do better to be home by a certain time every night. Most of the things that shouldn't happen after 10, 11 o'clock at night. So be at home. It's good for your children to have a schedule. And that's one of the pluses when they're in our shelter, when we house families with kids. They knew that they had to be home by 10, so the kids knew they'd be there and wouldn't be out roaming. They'd have to be at the shelter, in bed, at home. So it's just one of those cases of, if they can really focus on their goals, which is what I do. I'm going to push, pull, and prod to keep pointing them in the directions of these goals in order to get out of their homeless situation. I tell my residents all the time, I only want to see you here once. I don't want you to ever have to come back.
Sounds like you're talking about the importance of structure then,
Very
instilling
much so.
Structure in the
Structure
families
and
that maybe aren't
consistency.
accustomed to
Right.
structure and consistency.
Right.
And
Very
we
much
really
so.
see that at the school. And that is something that when I had students that were at the shelter, I knew, okay, good, because we're going to have a lot of consistency, and it's going to show up in school. And when the home is chaos, it shows up in school too, because stress does that. You can only deal with so much prolonged stress, and then what happens is that it affects their academic performance.
Sure, it's hard to focus on getting the math test done when you don't know where you're going home at the end of the day.
So it's very valuable to have that consistent home life.
Structure. Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit also about some of the other causes we might run into. Addiction is something that's mentioned sometimes. Mental illness sometimes. Physical illness or disabilities. Do you run into these kinds of situations that have been the cause of homelessness? I know I can think of several occasions where we've had somebody in the shelter, the PCM shelter, that came in with a master's degree. But addiction or mental illness is no respecter of anybody's education level or their upbringing. You can become so ill with addiction or so ill with a mental illness that you are unable to maintain the normal daily routine and basically lose everything. I remember a couple situations like that.
Oftentimes they're also they go hand in hand. It's hard to determine if it's just an addiction and then it brought about a mental illness, or if it was a mental illness that they tried to self-medicate with prescription drugs that aren't theirs, or with illegal drugs. And yes, it can definitely cause homelessness, because for a person who has an addiction, if they have to choose between buying their drugs or paying their rent, more often than not, they're going to buy their drugs, and then they're going to end up homeless. They recognize oftentimes that it's a bad idea, but they just can't help themselves. And then treatment is not readily accessible, even for those that want to get treatment.
That's
it takes a
interesting.
lot to get into treatment these days. There's a wait list, and if a person decides today that they're tired of what they're doing and they want help, there's probably nowhere they can go today to get that help. And then by the time the help comes around, they've changed their mind.
Yeah.
They've moved on to something else. So there's addiction and mental illness that can cause the problem. There's underemployment that can cause the problem. You know, sometimes people get a better job today, and it seems like they're really, because it's Christmas time, so they're getting 35, 40 hours because it's Christmas, but then those hours will drop the first of the year, but their rent doesn't drop,
Right.
other than in subsidized housing. So when their rent drops, they don't have the money to, when their rent goes up with them having less income, they can't pay their rent.
Right.
And rather than, unfortunately, people don't make the right choice when it comes to go talk to your landlord. Sometimes if they talk to the landlord, explain the situation, they might be willing to work with them, but people oftentimes, they panic and they just take off.
I was going to ask a question about that. When it comes to our current economic situation, we have in this area, we have sometimes companies that close down. Do you wind up seeing consequences of that? Do you see people come to the homeless shelters because just out of nowhere their income has gone away?
Sometimes. Oftentimes they see them at the main office first, where they'll go in for financial assistance because they can kind of piecemeal their rent together from this place and that place, and they will struggle to try to stay where they are because they don't want to go into a homeless shelter because they think that it's going to be the cots in the rooms and you know, lots of people in one room.
Well, that's what I think
Like
of.
a barracks.
That's what I think of. I mean, you think of a place where lots of people are basically in a single location rather than what does a homeless shelter look like?
Well, that's interesting because there's all different kinds. You know, there are the barracks kinds where somebody can get off the street, get into a safe place, you know, place to sleep for the night, a warm meal, maybe a hot shower, and that's important because sometimes that's all that somebody wants.
Sure.
And then there's other types of shelters, of which PCM is more that type, where we're trying to break that cycle of homelessness. And we want to talk a little bit about what are some of the barriers that people face in order to get back up on their feet. What does it take to be able to get out of homelessness? What's needed? Because I think that it's not as simple as just getting a job or just getting an apartment. Is that right?
No, not by
Is that a
any
little bit
means.
complicated sometimes?
Yes, quite often, most of the time, yes. Every now and then we'll get someone that comes in that really does just need 30 days and they can get back in a place and continue to maintain. But more often than not, our residents need life skills, you know, the simple things of you don't throw, you know, food in the trash that you could have saved for tomorrow to eat so that you're not hungry tomorrow. Storage, food storage, not putting ground beef on the windowsill to thaw it out. Just simple
Money
things that we all
management, I
take for
guess,
granted.
yeah.
Yes, money management, child care, what's the proper way to
Childcare.
take care of your children. Child care is expensive, so if they don't have a babysitter, they're not going to be able to get and maintain a job.
Employment, yeah.
Transportation can be a hindrance to getting and keeping a job.
Yes.
We, in our shelter, we're able to give our residents city bus passes so they can get around. But even with that, a lot of times when our residents look for a job, they try to look for a job around the bus schedule, which means it's going to limit them
Sure.
tremendously because the buses stop running at 5 o'clock.
So it sounds like a real tenuous balance. You've got to
much so.
keep the transportation going. You've got to find a job that has enough hours that you can pay your bills with. You've got to keep everybody at home healthy because I know that PCM,
One
we
cold.
see folks that have a job and the flu hits their house and then you miss a couple days of work and you don't get paid for those days. And that begins the slide that you were talking about. You know, a local restaurant closed recently, and about a week later we had somebody come in, and as you say, they start patching it, they try and keep it together, but if a solution doesn't come along pretty quickly, they're going to fall further and further behind. They're going to lose the house, they're going to start staying from house to house to house until they've run out of couches. And then we're sort of, you know, shelters are the last resort. There's a lot of reasons why somebody becomes homeless, and
So many
rarely is
people-
it choice.
So many people are a paycheck away from homelessness. You know, even if it was just that their paycheck is late, it can throw everything into a tailspin and then they can't pay their bills.
What about housing in this community? Any comments on that? Do we have enough affordable housing? Is housing affordable? What do we know about that? Is that part of the equation? We've talked about transportation.
There is subsidized housing here,
Okay.
but not everybody qualifies for it.
Does everybody need it that we work with?
Yes.
Okay.
If they're starting out in our shelter, they need subsidized housing.
What is subsidized housing?
Subsidized housing is it's HUD subsidized. It's through the federal government, and it subsidizes a person's rent, whereas each community has what's called fair market rent, which would be, say, for a 3-bedroom, which our numbers lady is not here, but a 3-bedroom, it may be $735. Would be considered about the fair market price for a rent. But if you're working at McDonald's,
Right.
that's a lot of
That's
money.
a lot of money.
That's a whole lot of money. That's your paycheck both times, and you still have your utilities to pay. So subsidized housing is, you might pay, if it's basically it should be $735. Subsidized housing is 30%. You pay 30% of your income toward whatever your rent would be. So that helps a lot of families, but a lot of families can't get in subsidized housing for various reasons. They have to have a fairly good criminal background record. They don't keep you out if you have a criminal background. They don't do that. But if you've had recent drug charges and no drug treatment, you can't get in. I don't care if you've been clean for a year. If you've got recent drug charges, you can't get in. So that leaves them on the outside of that. Section 8, which is another HUD subsidy, are not taking applications right now. So they're not even filling any of their program because they've got so many people on their wait list and it's been frozen. So yes, there's still a need for affordable housing, most definitely. And our rents here are pretty high.
Yeah.
So
we all need somebody to wait on us at Taco John and Walmart and 5-Star, but we may not realize that they're not making enough to actually afford an apartment in the private sector. Right.
They may actually be working 2 jobs to be able to try to pay the rent, and even then it's
transportation falls through, you're in trouble.
Or they lose a couple hours of work, or they are told that hours are being cut, or it's going to cause a problem.
So that's one of the areas where the homeless shelters come in that like PCM provides. Can I ask you a question with regards to the schools? What kind of facilities or what kind of things are available through or in the schools through what you guys do?
So what we do, and our mission is to really make education accessible. And so we reduce all the barriers, such as transportation. If a child has any issues with academic performance, we can help with tutoring and after school. We also have a contract with Four Rivers Behavioral Health. So, and I always, when I have, especially my high schoolers in junior high, I'll say, how's your stress level? And they're always like, high. And it's like, how about we have you talk to somebody? And that's in school. So someone comes to them and they set up regular meetings, which is absolutely fabulous, actually. And I think that does so much. I think we don't realize how much that stress is impeding their educational progress and their ability to cope. So we do those kinds of things, and it's all about how do I get you student who has some issues at home right now on an even playing field. How can I reduce those stresses that are caused by that and get you this education that I know is incredibly valuable and is going to actually change your life, you know.
Will it help to break that cycle that we're talking
absolutely.
about?
We did last year. I do an after-school program, and we'll do it again this year. And we really focus on technology. And I had kids, and they were coding. I mean, I'm just like, here, this is the most marketable skill I can give you. And you know what? They hire really young people to do this. So I'm like, and I have, all my junior high kids are coding, and so it's like
through like the hour of code kind of thing.
Yeah, we did. We did code.org. We did our hour of code, and then we kept going, and so it's really amazing what potential is there. We just have to think about it in creative ways of saying, okay, you've got these issues, but we're gonna set you up here for something really big, and I want you guys to dream. And I always ask them when they come in, what is the dream for your life?
Yeah.
Because I don't want you focusing on all this. I want you to tell me what's your dream. We can focus either way here. And so that's kind of how we come in. That's the entrance into our after school program is to think ahead and to think about that future story for their lives.
Yeah,
So
future story.
Well, kids have no control. They have no control over what their family is going through right now. And so what we can do is acknowledge, there's not anything you can do about this situation with your folks. But what we can do is start thinking about the time when you do have control over your life and getting you as prepared for that as possible with the value systems and the education and just getting them thinking, as you said, what is your dream? You don't have one? Well, let's find one. Let's get on it.
And we have really good, we have family resource personnel in every school. And so they kind of take that step too. We do like a backpack program. So if I know, hey, they're staying in their car or whatever, please, and we'll load them up with some snacks and some food, and that goes home for the weekend. And so there's these weekend food programs as well. And we do an after-school snack program at the middle school, and so there's some really good teamwork. There's a really good healthy approach to how do we get these kids engaged in positive ways. So
in the little time that we have, is there a short answer to what happens to the things that these people had before they were homeless? What happens to, they had homes at one time. What happens to, does it just go away? They lose it through?
Oftentimes they have to walk away from it all. A lot of times with the residents, sometimes when they come in, they've got their stuff in storage and they're trying their best to pay these storage bills, and they'll even ask, is there anybody that will pay my storage? And what I have started telling them and have been saying for years is, you need to look at this as being lost in a fire. You made it out with your life, which means you have the chance to start over again. When we had women and children, hey, you've got your kids, so it's a chance to start over again. So think of it as being lost in a fire, and you've just got to start over.
Have to be able to let go and look forward instead of backwards.
You still got the main part of you that you need, which is yourself. This can be done. And trust me, you will accumulate a lot of new stuff quickly.
Well, you guys are awesome, because it sounds to me like the most important thing of all is having somebody there to kind of coach you and encourage you and to direct you and
help you believe.
Yeah, help you believe, help you clarify your thoughts. And we've just barely touched the surface of this. We didn't even get into what needs to happen to change this in our country and our community so that we don't have so many families in homelessness. But I guess we'll have to do that in yet another program, because it isn't an easy topic. It's not a simple solution even. It's not a simple reason people get into homelessness, and there's not a simple solution to get out of homelessness. But thank you for what you do every day for seeing beyond the homelessness to the person who's standing there and speaking and working with their hearts and with those children especially. We just appreciate y'all. And Scott, I always appreciate being with you.
Absolutely, me too.
Always good to visit with you and with you all out there. And we appreciate your time today with us on Reflections, and hope that you'll tune in with us again next time. Thank you.